is having any trouble, they can always watch it on there too. Bear with me, sorry, technology is wonderful sometimes. Okay, all right, so welcome so much to everyone who's here. Yes. We are here today for our Tools for Achievement, Study Skills for... I'm sorry, I'm having some issues with feedback, so I am hearing myself twice. Okay, hi guys.
You sound fine for me.
So we are here today for the Tools for Achievement, Study Skills for High School and Beyond. We have Dr. Ben Fedor with us. As I mentioned before, if you have any questions, you can put them in the chat and I will try to get those answered as we move along. And Ben will also try to keep an eye on it as best we can. I'd like to introduce Ben, but of course I lost, you know. Okay. I apologize, guys. I'm so sorry.
Some things are easier with a stack of papers.
Oh, goodness gracious. Okay, here we go. Let's get started. All right. Dr. Ben Fedor found his passion for teaching when the study of philosophy changed his life, and he realized he wanted to help others awaken their minds as he had. He earned his PhD in analytic philosophy from Brown University and taught for 5 years at the College William and Mary in Virginia before joining Huntington. He has served as the owner and executive director of Huntington Schomburg since 2017. He has 2 children of his own and is a firm believer in a professional, individualized approach to instruction because every single child is unique. And I'm going to let you go ahead and take it away, Ben, okay?
All right, thank you very much. Couldn't have said it better myself because, you know, I wrote it, but but yes, no, thank you very much. Thank you for that wonderful introduction, and thank everybody for coming today. We are going to be going over study skills, and I want to note first off, right off the bat, that the title here can be a little misleading. Tools for Achievement, Study Skills for High School and Beyond, and then down below, a practical workshop for parents and high school students. Note, very importantly, it says and not of or anything like that. This is really it's geared towards parents, and it's geared towards high school age students capable of kind of internalizing, understanding, and then executing some of the things that we're going to be going over today. Younger students presumably would need a little bit of help for that. But I want to assure you that it's kind of presented in a way that is going to look like it's, you know, geared towards high school students specifically in a couple of places, but that's really not the case. This is very, very much generalized, and I'll try to make that as clear as I can in the commentary as we go through. But yes, thank you very much once again for coming. As Rosanna noted, I have a background in education from a myriad couple of perspectives. I've been a student for a long time, teacher for a while, and now I'm with Huntington, and could not have wound up at a better place. The one-on-one instruction that we get to do, working with students and seeing them develop over the course of you know, sometimes weeks, sometimes months, it's incredibly rewarding, and we've got so many students whose lives we're changing. It's really great. And you know, Huntington's been around for 40 something years, so a lot of what you're going to hear today has been kind of in development for quite some time, and is really tested in the crucible, as it were, of kind of education in the field. At Huntington, we work with kids as young as kindergarten, going all the way up to adults and college age students, working with, in phonics, reading, math, study skills, writing, enrichment, and of course, exam prep. Together with the schools in our community, our mission is to give every student the best education possible. And that's pretty much what we're here to go over. So I'm going to be speaking to you today about study skills. The focus of some of the comments, again, as I said, are presented here with an eye towards high school students, but much will be relevant to middle and elementary school students. And I'm going to do my best to make sure that that's clear. If you're worried about your child's academic success in any way, shape, or fashion, whether you think they just could do better, or you're worried that in the future they might not do as well as they could, then you're in the right place, no matter what their age is. Before we begin, as Rosanna said, please feel free to make comments or ask questions in the chat, and we'll try to get to them as we go. And there also will be time for Q&A at the end, and I will be happy to stay as long as necessary to answer any questions that you have. Okay. So with that all said, students at all levels are presented with challenging coursework and must maintain a certain amount of responsibilities each day. If your child does not possess the necessary study skills, he or she is she's not going to be able to manage dealing with these demands. In this presentation, we're going to talk about how your child can develop the study skills needed to achieve success in school and to reach his or her full academic potential. We will discuss the importance of studying, address some of the common misconceptions that are out there kind of in the air about studying, discuss the relationship between self-awareness and learning that is really an integral part of being an effective learner. And we're going to examine different areas of study skills and talk about some strategies that can be developed in each of those areas. Finally, we'll just, as a brief mention, this is not a commercial for Huntington in any way, but we will mention some of the things that Huntington does along the way in order to kind of really, I want you to see it more of an example, a concrete kind of explication of what it is that you can do with your student via the lens of kind of what we try to do in the center with our students. So that said, let's take a look at the importance of study skills first and foremost. Studying is going to be more than just memorizing information. Okay, in order to be successful, students must have the tools necessary to effectively acquire, retrieve, analyze, and communicate information. So they're going to have to be able to isolate important bits of info from study materials. They're going to have to be able to recall important information, sometimes very quickly. They're going to have to evaluate information by relating it to other concepts and information previously learned. Sometimes they have to be critically analyzing the information that's coming in, whether it's trustworthy or not, but also just whether they understood what was being presented, whether the whole story was being presented, half the truth, maybe a slant was being given to it, and so forth. And then, of course, whatever understanding they glean, they're going to have to be able to effectively relay that information to verbalize it. If they can't, if they fall down at any one of those steps, you've got a study skills problem. Okay. Having effective study skills is going to impact more than a student's ability to perform well on tests. Study skills is going to affect your ability to manage deadlines and coursework effectively, to stay organized, record and remember information, read actively by questioning what is being read and relating it back to previously learned information. Effective study skills will also help you, because of all of these things, it's going to help you manage test anxiety. You're going to be able to use strategies while taking an exam. You're going to be able to write well-written essays and reports, sometimes short answers on exams and so forth. And you're going to be able to produce and deliver presentations simply because you will know the material and you also have the skills to be able to affirm for yourself that you know the material, so that you can go into these presentations, these tests and so forth, knowing that you've got what is going to be required of you to be successful. Okay. Without these skills, students are not equipped to meet the academic expectations that they're going to be facing each day, and which get harder and harder every grade level as they progress in their career as a student. So there are a lot of misconceptions about studying. So let's take a moment to look at some of the most popularly held beliefs, if you want to put it that way, about what it means to study. There's certainly all of these that I'm about to go over are ones that I have, we do conferencing, we do extensive evaluations with students, and then we sit down with the parents and talk to them about what we found, so we sometimes spend 4 hours evaluating a student who's a candidate for, coming in for instruction at Huntington. And then we spend 2-3 hours evaluating that information. And then we sit down with mom and dad for an hour, hour and a half, 2 hours, however long it takes to explain to them our findings and what we would like to do with that student. And in the course of doing that with family after family, I cannot tell you how many times I've seen these sorts of preconceptions manifest in various ways in those conversations with parents. So all of these are very much out there, whether or not you maybe feel some of them to an extent or not. We're going to go through them all because it's very important to understand not only that some of these might be misconceptions, but also exactly how or why or to what degree they might be misconceptions. Okay. So I'm going to read aloud some statements about studying, and as I do, I want you to think about whether each statement might be true or false, or maybe true to a degree, or something like that. So let's start with the truth about studying here. Rereading a textbook and/or notes, while time-consuming, ensures deeper comprehension and long-term retention of information. Would you say this is true or false? Now, obviously, we're not in an audience where you can raise your hand. That's normally how I would do this. So you don't need to throw your answer into the chat or anything, but just think to yourself whether you think this is true or false. And what we are going to say here is that this is false, that rereading is, because it is not an active learning procedure and does not necessarily require much thought, we're going to say that this is false. Okay, I'm going to say that it's false mostly because it's an absolute statement. Notice that the statement here uses the word ensures deep comprehension. Okay, so that in itself, we kind of set a low bar here for calling this a false statement. Okay, but really importantly, to understand exactly how and why this might prove to be false, right, is really important. So it's worth thinking about. Rereading information certainly can help and may in fact be required in order to learn information. You might have to go over something more than once. So it might be a necessary requirement to go over something a couple of times, maybe even a bunch of times. But this is only going to be one part of a toolkit or a process in order to be effective. Okay, it is reading in this sense is an inherently passive activity and thus does not often yield good results in and of itself. When studying requires a moderate amount of effort at the very least, maybe by creating an outline while you're reading, for example, students are going to be able to achieve deeper understanding of material, thereby improving long-term retention of the information studied. Okay, so to kind of visualize this, I don't know if you've ever been in a position where maybe you're singing along with a song. Maybe it's one of your favorites and you've known this song since you were a kid, but it's been like maybe even a decade since you actually thought about any of the lyrics that you're singing. You're just like robotically producing these sounds. And a lot of times when you're reading, especially when you're reading and rereading, at a certain point, these words are just bouncing up off the page and kind of hitting you in the face, but they're not really doing anything. You're just producing sounds when you're reading this, even if you're not necessarily reading out loud. At a certain point, it becomes inefficient, ineffective, and kind of useless. At a certain point, it becomes a waste of time if you're not actively engaging with the materials. You have to be reading actively. And one way to make that happen is, by example, creating an outline of what you're reading as you're reading. So engaging with the material is crucial for success. Okay, make the learning and a studying process more challenging by using strategies like spacing learning apart. Have learners generate test material, force students to use their mental muscles and encourage a deeper processing of materials. If this slide there's a typo here, it should read, making learning as easy as possible may increase short-term performance and immediate recall, but at times it can decrease the more important long-term retention Okay, all of these are bullet points under a heading here of desirable difficulty. Okay, so forcing you to engage with the material rather than just having some words kind of robotically memorized without really engaging with the content is going to be much more important. Okay, so a really good example of this, and we see this all the time. You know, we have a lot of kids, especially younger kids, who are dealing with vocabulary issues and things like that. And when they're in some of our vocabulary pieces, they will be creating flashcards. And those flashcards, they will be reviewing, you know, every time they come in. And what we'll sometimes see with students is if you are going through the flashcards in the same order every single time, and then suddenly you change the order in which the words are coming, all of a sudden they can't do it anymore. Like they were 100% and now they're at like 75. Just because you changed up the order in which the cards were coming out and being shown to them. That just demonstrates how this kind of robotic processing, all right, this providing of a, you might not even realize you're doing it, but by providing a structure in which that information is always being presented, their brain is kind of relying upon that structure. They're not using the muscles. And when the crutch is taken away, the muscles haven't been developed and they're falling down. To, you know, use the metaphor a little bit too heavy-handedly. Okay. Here's another example. Multitasking allows students to complete work more successfully and efficiently. Okay, doing more things than one at a time might lead you to be able to accomplish more over time. And you see students doing this all the time, especially by the time they get to high school. Kids are doing, or they'll tell you they're doing 3 or 4 things at once, right? Or bouncing back and forth. And usually they will tell you it's because it helps with their engagement, right? But this statement is false. And there's really good reasons to be very, very careful with multitasking, okay? Switching between tasks will negatively affect the accuracy of completed work. It takes time to refocus on a task when you've been taken away from it, and get back on task when, and this is going to, by definition, make study time be less efficient, okay? In fact, research has shown that multitasking actually has an adverse effect on performance, okay? For example, a study was conducted at George Mason University in April of 2014. And during the study, students were given 3 one-minute interruptions while outlining in preparation for writing an essay. They were alternatively given 3 one-minute interruptions while writing an essay, or else they were just given no interruptions at all. So there was, you know, a control group, okay? Each of the essays was then blindly evaluated by the College Board using a 6-point scale, okay? The results showed that 90% of students who were interrupted, either while outlining or writing, produced work of significantly lower quality than students who were not interrupted at all. Students who were interrupted while writing also wrote fewer words than students who were not interrupted while writing. Further analysis suggests that the reduction in word count resulted, as you might expect, from interruptions inhibiting the student's thought process, and as a result, the participants failed to fully develop their ideas. Okay, and actually, we see this in a number of ways, in, of course, in students of all ages, but it really is very pronounced in the exam prep programs when you have students who are really struggling with some of the standardized tests that are put in front of them, simply because it's hard for them to focus, and giving them strategies for remaining focused on some of the reading and some of the writing, some of what they're doing is actually as important or as successful in raising their scores as, you know, developing those fundamental skills in the first place, which of course is also something that we want to do. Okay, so, you know, take a moment to think about your child's studying environment, right? Is it noisy? Is your child interrupted by their cell phone, perhaps by their sibling, by noises, by chores, by duties, what have you? Were your child, you know, where they're studying can be just as important as how your child studies. They might tell you that they do great with music on, but is it true, right? That said, boredom and fatigue can also be hobgoblins to education. So you don't want the study, area to become, a prison either, right? And we'll come back to this in a second. It's going to be a question of balance. Okay, so we're going to look at the flip side of this, if you want to put it that way now. So here's another thing that students and parents often believe: the longer the student studies, the better that he or she will do on a test. Basically, so you'll have students who are preparing to take an exam, and they're up till 4 a.m. that night studying, right? And then they're shocked when they roll into school on no sleep and don't do all that well. But even that, even the lack of sleep set aside, you might not be better just cramming for days on end. It's not about the volume of time that you're spending on your studying activities. Okay, so this is false. Studying in large blocks of time is actually going to be counterproductive because it leads to fatigue and poor retention of material. It is going to be better, whenever possible, to study in blocks of time with breaks in between, which gives the student a chance to self-test and helps to prevent fatigue. Okay, so studying for long stretches of time is just ineffective. Okay, all of us have a threshold, wherever it might be, for how long we're going to be able to maintain concentration. After studying for long periods of time, students become fatigued, which leads to poor retention of the material being studied. And especially if you then go back and reread, then if you're tired and you're fatigued, you're much more likely to fall into that robotic state that we talked about before. Okay. Instead, students need to be able to study in blocks of time with breaks in between each block. And sometimes the longer the better. If you've got a test, is it better to spend 4 hours studying the day before, or 1 hour a day for the 4 days leading up to the exam? 9 times out of 10, it's going to be better off spread out. Okay. Of course, this is also where things can become a little bit difficult because, as always, every student is going to be different. Okay. We spoke a few moments ago about the detrimental effect that interruptions can have on productivity and the quality of work. So, for instance, consider a child, one child might have ADHD and another child, of course, doesn't, right? Consider maybe a younger child as opposed to an older student, and at different levels of maturity, right? Or, just academic stamina, as it were, okay? There are going to be different lengths of time that are going to be ideal for each of them to work. And it's going to be a process sometimes of exploration to discover what those thresholds are for each student. Okay, it's just really important to note that studying for too long can be bad, but also it's important to break things up, but you don't want to have unnecessary interruptions. So you have to find that proper balance for each student, and the types of interruptions you're allowing, the types of distractions that you're allowing are going to be important as well. Okay. Here's another one that's actually very interesting. Taking notes on a computer is better than taking notes by hand. And this is, of course, all the more relevant the more that technology becomes prevalent in the classroom. And it's something that was very certainly an issue when I was teaching at William and Mary. I had a lot of students just clickety-clacketing away on their computers during lecture. And it's all well and good, even setting aside the students who are probably in the back of the room watching YouTube instead of listening. You've got us, there's good and bad in this. Okay, so this is it. We're going to say this is false, but it's false only in that it's not universally true. Okay, there are advantages and there are disadvantages to taking notes on a computer. Okay, for example, taking notes on a computer allows the student to edit and reorganize notes quickly, but it's also easy for the student to become distracted. Okay, that's certainly true, and definitely true for younger students. I mentioned YouTube and everything. There are distractions like that, but let's abstract. Let's suppose we can control even for the distractions. Like, we know that they're in their word processor and only their word processor. Somehow we can guarantee that. There's still, I think, issues with this, and they've done studies on this, but the thing that always jumps up to me, again, having that experience in the lecture, and it really meshes with that earlier point about having to be actively engaged with your reading and not being robotic and just having the words kind of come up and hit you in the face. If you are able, because here's one way to think about it. You can type a heck of a lot faster than you can write. At least most people can, okay? As a result, what I've found is that when people are taking notes during a lecture in class on the keyboard, even if they're fully invested, what they wind up doing is going into something that I call court stenographer mode. They're just verbatim trying to copy and get down everything you said. And there's this mindset, and this can happen when they're writing with a pencil too, but it's really prevalent on the keyboard, where they're just madly scrambling to get every single chunk of content out of that lecture recorded because, heaven forbid they miss something, right? By contrast, and again, this is borne out by studies, by research, that if you're forced to write much more slowly, say because you're working with a pen or a pencil on paper, and you're just not able to keep up with the pace at which your teacher is speaking, right? Well, then you're forced, instead of trying to copy what they're saying, you're forced to attend to what they're saying, to listen to what they're saying, to try to understand what they're saying in real time, and then record the important bits of information as you see them, as they come up, okay? This is going to be a much better process for creating notes, because those notes are going to be less rambling. They're going to be much more efficient. They're going to be the central points. They're going to be much more concise. But also, when you go back and you use those notes, you are going to actually have your brain is going to be better prepared to receive that information because you've already processed it. Okay. By contrast, if you're in court stenographer mode, you could finish a lecture and have no idea what was being said, even though you transcribed it almost perfectly. So this is another danger to the use of the computer. There is something to the use of the longhand note. Okay. So research has very definitely suggested that laptop note takers tend to write out lectures verbatim rather than processing information and recording the information in their own words. Okay. So let's talk a little bit about self-awareness. Okay, we've talked about all these things, these pitfalls that you can fall into. We've talked about a couple of assumptions that we want to shatter. Now we want to start talking about how we can become aware of, our strengths and weaknesses as a student, where we might be able to do a little bit better. Okay. We're going to talk about a term here, metacognition, the awareness and understanding of one's own learning, which is going to be key to success. Okay. Students who understand key strategies for learning and thinking can effectively apply them while studying to perform better in school. Okay. The right tool for the job is basically what we're on about here. Simply put, metacognition is thinking about thinking. Students that study effectively are able to do so, at least in part because they have an understanding of how they in particular learn, and also what studying approaches work best in a scenario, sometimes work best for them in a scenario. Okay, so metacognition can be broken down into three categories, three types of awareness. The first type can be described as strategic knowledge. Okay, if your child possesses strategic knowledge, it means that he or she knows general strategies that can be used for different tasks. The second type of metacognition pertains to knowledge about cognitive tasks. This means that your child has an understanding of when to apply a given strategy. For example, flashcards might work very well for studying scientific terminology, anatomy or something like that, or in a foreign language, right? Just a vocabulary list, right? But flashcards is not going to be a very good strategy to use when studying maybe chapters from a novel, for instance, depending on the novel. The last type of metacognition is self-knowledge. If your child possesses self-knowledge, then he or she is going to have an awareness of which study strategies work best for them and which are not as effective. now that we've discussed the importance of metacognition, let's begin to explore the different areas of study skills themselves. Okay. Areas of focus for study skills include executive functioning, evidence-based study skills, test-taking strategies, papers and presentations, and then college application essay writing. Okay, now again, this is put together by Huntington, and this is, originally put together with a gear towards the high school audience. That said, so we're not going to talk much about the college application essay writing process here. That said, it is going to involve just so you have an eye towards the future. Maybe you have an elementary school student, but you also have a high school student. The application process is going to be really important for when they're applying to schools, and the actual application essays are really important. Not nearly as important as GPA and test scores, but it is going to be very important. It's not something you want to shortchange. And it's going to be, assuming the student is left to their own devices to actually write it, it's going to be, for some of them, very, very difficult, because while they're in school and they're learning these skills for papers and presentations, that's all well and good. And you might think the application it's yet another paper, but it's very often very different in kind from the types of paper they're used to writing in school. And they might do one or two kind of, surveys of how to write this in school, but it's a whole other skill set. There's a lot of factors to consider, and it can be quite a challenge for a lot of students. Sometimes students that do very, very, very well in writing courses come to us with an application essay, and we're like, no, you got to change this pretty completely. So there's a set of skills there that are very important. Okay. But coming back to just broad study skills in general, executive functioning. The first area we're going to look at is executive functioning. It is essential to self-management. Executive functioning, what do we mean by that? Well, this is going to involve skills that enable students to plan and set goals, be organized, remember instructions, juggle multiple tasks successfully. That doesn't necessarily mean doing them all at once, but knowing which ones are in the offing, which ones are due, when to do them best, and so forth. Okay. Allotting their time, using their time wisely. One key component of executive functioning is organizational skills. Students must be able to create a work environment conducive to learning, as well as have methods of organizing digital information. Okay, so it's all well and good to have wonderful notes, but if you can't find the darn things efficiently, you're wasting time when you're studying. You're adding to your stress, you're adding to the inefficiency, and in order to study the same number of pages, you're spending sometimes twice as long. And there comes that fatigue hobgoblin once again. Executive functioning skills also include time management. Students with strong time management skills are going to be able to create schedules, overcome procrastination, balance their obligations, and so forth, right? So the weekly planner and so forth. Now, a lot of parents are really proactive in this, in this vein, which is wonderful. Students will have parents kind of telling them when is their homework time. They're on Schoology or what have you, and they know when assignments are due, and they're making sure students are getting it done. And that's great, because it's certainly better than having them not get their stuff done on time, right? But there is a little bit of a danger here, in that at some point those training wheels do have to come off, right? Sometimes it happens sometime in high school when students, demand independence, and parents decide, well, they're old enough now, they should be able to do this on their own, so they kind of ease off. And you'll find sometimes students are now all of a sudden not turning in work. And because you've gotten out of the habit of creating the weekly planner and stuff, it's hard to rectify. Even worse, you'll sometimes see students that have had at least some degree of hand-holding all through high school, and then they go off to college. And one of the reasons that they self-destruct when they get to college is they just don't have the wherewithal to do this, right? So it's great to do it, but while you're doing it, you really need to be modeling how you're doing it for your child, so that when the time comes so that they know they need to do it, they actually know how to do it, okay? All right, sorry, I'm juggling a couple of computers here, bear with me. Goal setting. At Huntington, students are taught strategies to enhance their goal setting skills. Okay, we do this by encouraging students to be active learners who take the initiative to reflect upon and apply what they're learning, instead of passive learners who do not take control of their learning and do not go beyond what instructors say or request. We also help students demonstrate drive, fortitude, and responsibility, and teach students to use different methods of goal setting, including personal action statements, learning contracts, and the like. And again, every student is different. So whether we do or do not need to do this with a particular student that's the decision that we make on a case-by-case basis, okay? But it's certainly always something that we consider with every student. We also empower students to maximize their productivity. We do this by helping students to recognize what type of learner they are and provide students study strategies geared toward learning preferences, okay? Teaching students to adapt to teachers' different instructional styles is also a key component here, okay? In order to be a successful student, and again, you're gonna see this in college, but you're gonna see it before college. You sometimes see it in elementary school. You know, we all have at some point in our I won't say all, but a lot of times students will run into a teacher that they're just not clicking with, right? Second grade was awesome. Mrs. Wilson just nailed it. Third grade, not so much. I'm not quite digging Mr. Kling, right? Or, you know, my math teacher is rough, but I love my science teacher, okay? Well, what is it about the math teacher that is so rough? I mean, I'm not naive enough or silly enough to say that there aren't bad teachers out there. But maybe it's just a question of ill fit. Maybe this teacher's style doesn't quite fit your student. But it's important to be aware of that, but it's also important to know that that doesn't mean there isn't something that you can do about it. A student can learn, can be taught how to get more out of that particular teacher's teaching style. So it's a very important lesson for students to internalize, especially as they're older students that become more self-aware and they're more actively engaged in developing their own kind of study skills and finding, you know, ways to be successful in school. Those are going to be students who are able to look at a teacher and say, what is he doing? What do I need to do in order to make this work for me? Okay. We also want to provide students with methods for managing things like procrastination, right? How do you get yourself to just get off your butt and do your work? Okay. So areas of focus for study skills, right? Let's take a moment to think about, as an example, some of the ways that students can develop some of their goal setting abilities. Okay, in order to set attainable and actionable goals, students need, one way you can do that is to create personal action statements or plans. Okay, a personal action plan is a written step-by-step plan that is used to implement a particular strategy for a specific action plan. Okay, by creating and evaluating personal action statements, students can improve how they approach different learning tasks. Okay. Let's take a moment to look at maybe an example of a template that you could use with your student to create a personal action statement, you know, something like this, okay? The first step is going to be to ask the student to identify the action that they're going to take in order to improve their studying, okay? So they're going to say something like, I will do this, that, or the other thing, right? I will take better notes in class. I will make sure I write down my homework assignment before I leave every day, right? Because we all know that, especially younger kids, they leave class and they haven't written anything down. They're relying on their friend Becky to tell them what the homework is, right? Obstacles that would hinder me from achieving this are. So the next step is to have them think about what is preventing them from doing this in the first place, okay? Then the next step is to look at identifying the obstacles that you might face. Okay, so the student will think about how to overcome those obstacles. Okay, next, then the student is asked to determine how long he or she is going to implement the action plan. Okay, this is actually a very important part of the plan. Students need to ensure that they implement a strategy long enough to see results, because it's only after seeing the results of that strategy that they're then going to have what we call buy-in. right? The students are going to actually realize when school becomes easier because they've been keeping up with their studies that, oh, this tweak that I made actually worked. Oh my goodness, my grades are going up. Oh, now all of a sudden they're motivated to keep doing it. And we may not even need an action plan anymore. Okay. Once this, there we go. Finally, the student must identify a reward for implementing the action. Okay, this could be something as simple as maybe an extra half hour of TV time or something like this for a relatively simple task that they've managed to achieve. Or maybe catching a movie with friends. Maybe it's that new Xbox game, you know, what have you. Okay. So here's an example of a completed personal action statement. Okay. I will recognize my notes and handouts every Sunday. Reorganize my notes and handouts every Sunday, making sure that they are arranged by subject and date for easy reference. Again, so I can find them when I need them, when it's time to study for a test and I'm not wasting time. I will place any notes or handouts that I no longer reference regularly into my Pendaflex for future reference. So I've got the notes that I need, the notes that I won't need for a little while. I've got them filed away, still organized, but filed away so that they're not producing clutter, getting in the way of the stuff that I need to access now. Okay. Obstacles that would hinder me from achieving this are forgetting to complete these steps. And of course, soccer practice taking up a lot of my time, maybe leaving me tired on Sunday so that I'm dragging and I just don't want to do it. Okay. I will overcome these obstacles by setting a reminder on my phone for Sunday mornings and Sunday evening. This reminder will help me remember to reorganize my notes. And notice they're both Sunday morning and Sunday evening. That's actually a really good idea. Okay. Remind yourself in the morning, remind yourself at the nighttime, because it's very easy, especially in the morning on a weekend when there's a lot of other stuff going on, to get an alert on your phone and say, yeah, I'm going to remember that. Turn it off, completely forget about it. And then the end of the day, it's not done. If you have the reminder at the end of the day in the evening, you can go, oh my gosh, I said I was going to do it and I didn't. Uh-oh. This reminder is going to help me remember to reorganize my notes. And if soccer practice runs long, I have another reminder in the evening to get organized before I go to bed. Okay. I will achieve this over the next month. This way I have enough time to see if these steps will work for me or if I need to make some adjustments. Maybe I'm not doing enough organizing. Now, you know, I've had a couple of tests that went by. Did I find that my organization was thorough enough so that I was finding material quickly? And hopefully now we've seen a difference in the ease that I had studying for some of those exams. And I'm starting to realize, well, this is actually a pretty good idea. Okay. My reward for this accomplishment will be one, less stress, because I know where my study materials are. I'm not wasting time when I'm studying. I have to spend less time studying. That's always a good sell for a student, right? If you do this ahead of time, when you study for a test, you won't have to study as long. Win, okay? I will also treat myself to a movie with my friends, right? Something nice, simple, doesn't have to be a new car or anything like that, okay? Let's talk about evidence-based study skills. Okay, the term evidence-based, first of all, means that these strategies have been proven effective through educational research or metrics used in school by teachers and student performance. Okay, at Huntington, we break these skills into 3 different areas: recording information, active listening, and enhancing memory. Before a student can record information gathered from online research, as an example, he or she needs to know that the information is accurate. At Huntington, for example, we will help students learn how to evaluate internet sources to determine if the site that they're using is trustworthy, provides valid information, right? Or maybe one side of a story, and therefore maybe to be, you know, use a bit of a loaded term, fair and balanced, right? Maybe go to the other side as well and see what they've got to say and cross-reference the two. Okay. In order for students to be able to record information effectively then from those sources, they must also have different methods of recording information, including note-taking, outlining, creating concept maps, diagrams, charts, timelines, and what have you. Okay. And again, in our advanced study skills program, we go through each one of these in sequence And if a student doesn't have an assignment or material that's relevant to that, we've got materials in-house that they can then use. So we've got like a textbook that they can go and try to study from and take notes on. And then we can go over, have a certified teacher sitting there with them, going over their notes and telling them where they did a good job taking notes, where maybe they could do a little bit better job. Students also need to be comfortable creating study guides out of these items. And this is actually really crucial. We see so many students who do a really, sometimes too thorough job taking notes, right? They outline the heck out of their textbook. But when they walk away from that, all they've got is this wall of green or wall of yellow on the page. You've outlined everything, but everything wasn't super crucial, right? And moreover, what use is that to study from, right? Everything's important. Well, okay, now we're reading the whole thing again, right? So you have to understand, if you make the student create study guides out of their study materials, that's going to, before test day hits, show them whether those study materials are sufficient. So some areas of focus for study skills, and here we're talking about evidence-based study skills and recording information, okay? Students with strong study skills are able to use a variety of methods to create effective study guides that are far more efficient than copying information over and over and over again, okay? So for example, again, highlighting is great, but highlighting within reason, as it were, okay? Connecting ideas and thoughts is also very important. So when you have a really advanced student, maybe they're using different colored highlighters for different types of commentary or notes or relationships. And then maybe if they're really advanced, in the margin of that book, they've got a little key to tell themselves, to remind themselves, because they might not look at this until finals, right? A month later, pink meant this kind of comment, green meant this kind of comment, and yellow meant this, okay? But they're also going to be able to create questions and answer guides themselves. They're going to be able to kind of maybe predict or anticipate what the teacher might be asking so that they know they're ready to answer those questions. They're going to be able to create outlines, make study cards, and the like. In addition to gathering information from texts, students must be able to actively listen. This means that students are able to isolate and record important information given in presentations, speeches, and lectures, okay? Successful students are going to be able to use verbal cues and nonverbal cues from their instructors to know when they should be recording information. Verbal cues from an instructor might include slowing down and pausing while speaking, repeating information, speaking more loudly, okay? Just as an anecdote, again, college professors speaking here. And William & Mary is a really good school. So I had really good students in here, but I cannot, anytime I actually stopped in the middle of a lecture and said explicitly, by the way, this is probably going to be on your test, you should probably write it down. All of a sudden there's an explosion of activity in the classroom. People are fumbling for their pencils and their papers. It's like, oh my gosh, I should be taking notes. Or even the people who have their note papers out and everything were like all, shocked into paying attention all of a sudden. But it, I'm up there talking for an hour. So obviously that wasn't the only point I was trying to make that day. So you have to be actively engaged with the instructor, and you have to be reading the instructor. Okay, if they're stressing something, pretty much anytime they're turning around writing something on the board, you should probably be putting some kind of a note down. But you'd be surprised how many students don't realize this is so. Okay, so nonverbal cues are going to include pointing, using hand gestures. All of a sudden, they're waving their hands all, everywhere, and braying at the top of their voice. That's probably an important point. You should probably write it down. It's also imperative that students are able to recall what they have learned and are able to connect new information with previously learned material. Okay, seeing the connections between data points in their education is going to be crucial for understanding, the bigger picture. In order to help them do this, we teach students different ways to use texts to remember key information. We teach memorization techniques such as mnemonics and other methods. We teach how to go back and revise or edit what they have learned to be able to retrieve thoughts and information faster. Okay, cutting to the chase is something that a lot of students can't do. So often students simply try to read text over and over again in the hopes of trying to just remember what is written on the page instead of understanding what is written. Okay. And I've talked about this right from the get-go, and this is really a huge thing for me. Okay. Um, when we have students coming in here, a lot of times we'll have students who are coming here for writing or for study skills. And in our testing, we'll reveal that they have huge issues at the reading level. And writing and some of these study skills, really, these are just active forms of reading, basically. If you're not engaging with the material, you can sound like you're reading fluently without really getting much out of the page. Okay. And if you're not getting much out of the page, that's going to reveal itself in your inability to express yourself in writing or verbally. It's also going to lead to a lot of anxiety on test day. Okay. This is just no way to learn. If you're just reading over and over again, that's the worst thing to do. Okay. You might have to read more than once, but if that's your strategy going in, you need some more ammunition. How can a student recall and explain information on a test if they don't understand it? The answer is, of course, that you can't, right? Why this is going to be why students must be able to monitor their comprehension of material as they are learning, okay? By actively engaging with themselves and with the text. So here's a couple of simple strategies that every student can use to monitor their own understanding of the material. First thing you do, chunk reading assignments. Break it into sections, and at the end of each section, quiz yourself. Make sure that you can tell yourself what was on the page just then. If you don't know, you need to go back and reread it. Okay. Create a concept web. Create a web to show how key concepts and ideas are related back to the main idea, right? How do they connect? If your child is unsure how ideas or concepts are connected, then he or she does not fully understand the material. Strategy 3, use guide questions, okay? Before reading, the child can create guide questions based on titles, headings, subtexts, and subheadings of the text. If your child is unable to answer questions after reading a text, then they did not fully comprehend what was read, okay? Put it in their own words. Test their ability to articulate answers to pertinent questions, okay? And very importantly, you want to make these as verbal as possible. You'll find students can do, and we see this in testing all the time with certain readers, they're able to do very well reading passages of a certain nature and answering multiple choice questions, but they do horribly with any kind of open-ended question or question that they have to verbalize. Okay, that can be the result of a fluency problem, a lack of vocabulary, a lack of confidence, possibly some, just at the level of writing and speech. But there can also be evidence there that they haven't fully understood the material, and without the crutch of it verbalizing, they just don't, the ideas haven't crystallized well enough for them to be able to put it into words. So it can seem like they know because they're able to answer questions that are given to them. If you prompt them the right way, they are able to recognize, oh yeah, I did read that. Okay, but that doesn't mean that in a week, you're going to be able to tell me what you just read. Okay, so being able to put it in your own words is critical to really demonstrating that you know what you're talking about. Okay. The next set of study skills that strong students possess is test-taking skills. Okay, it is important that students have developed skills so that they can tackle difficult assessments both confidently and successfully. Okay, one of the ways students can develop their test-taking skills is by gaining skills to prepare for the exam itself. Okay, so there's skills that you have in getting ready for the exam, and then there's skills for when you're in the chair. Okay, so these skills include strategies to manage test anxiety and ways to rehearse for the test. Okay, the preparation side of things. So students need skills to help them get ready for an exam. They are going to include previewing the test to see what types of questions they need to answer, okay? And what questions are worth the most points. This is going to help students make the most of their time. Students with strong test-taking skills are also able to hone in on key qualifying words like all, none, every, to help students answer tricky questions. Okay. Lastly, students must have effective ways to approach multiple choice questions, as well as open-ended and essay questions. So it's really important to be able to verbalize, but there are also strategies to help you deal with multiple choice questions by attending to very specific wording, not falling for traps. This is something we cover for the SAT and ACT all the time, not falling for trap answers and so forth. But also processes of elimination and confirmation by taking the answers back to the text or testing the answers against the questions themselves. Let's take a moment to look at a simple test-taking strategy that your child can use before pretty much every test, okay? Before the test, your child should remember the 3 S's, okay? The first one is very simple, supplies. Do you have your pencil, your eraser, your number 2 pencil, your calculator? Do you need a watch to track your time, and so on and so forth, right? Going into the SAT and the ACT, you can't have your cell phone. You can't have a certain kinds of digital watches and smart watches. And there's going to be a clock in the room somewhere, but maybe it's behind you. If you just got a simple analog wristwatch that is allowed in the room, that much better, right? Just being prepared for the exam can, of course, make the exam go better, but just knowing that you have it, knowing that you needed it and you solved it contributes to feeling more ready for the test, which helps with anxiety. Okay. Scribble, quickly scribble needed formulas or notes that might be forgotten. Okay. A classic example of this would be something like all these formulas that you use in geometry. But a really good example would be quadratic formula, right? Use these in quadratic equations in algebra 1 and 2, mostly 2, but negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac over 2a, right? I can rattle it off because I've got it memorized, but even if I have it down pat, but if I'm doing a test where I've got to, be using it on equation after equation after equation, I don't have to sit there and reinvent the wheel and for every problem, sit there and re-recite it to myself and then write it back down again. I'm going to go at the very beginning of that test after I've, if I know I need it, I'm writing that at the top of the page, beginning of the test, I'm writing out the quadratic formula and I've got it as a reference. And all of a sudden that test, which was an open book, is effectively open book for me. That again helps make your test time more efficient, more accurate, but also less anxious. Okay, so very, very, very helpful. The last one is survey. A very important skill for when you're in the chair is, the test plops down in front of you. Take a moment to look at what's on that test, right? And this is why test prep is so great for SAT and ACT. It's always following the same structure. It's always got the same format. And the more familiar you are with it, the better you've just got strategies in the can and ready. And you're going to feel that much more prepared. You're going to know exactly what you need to do for every single one of these tests. In college, in high school, and middle and elementary school, you get a test. You don't know what to expect necessarily. It comes down in front of you. You're looking at it. You want to pay attention to how much work is necessary for this type of problem, for this problem, for this problem. How much points is each one worth? Do you or do you not think you know or have a good shot at those points? Maybe you take care of those ones first, get them in the bank, and then work on the stuff that you're more dubious about, and so on and so forth. So surveying, knowing what you need to do with your time, having a plan for attacking it, and then watching the clock to making sure you're on top of that is going to be really important for being successful on a test. Okay. Next, we come to essay writing, okay, and presentations. Okay, let's start with presentations. Students are going to be assessed in a variety of ways. Okay, in addition to taking tests, you're also going to have to demonstrate your knowledge of a topic by writing essays, conducting presentations. Because of this, students must have the tools they need to write effectively, produce and conduct quality presentations. Students need to understand the different components needed to conduct quality presentation and be able to plan, prepare, practice, and present their information effectively. In order for students to write papers that fully reflect their knowledge of a topic, they need tools to overcome writer's block, and they should be able to apply 10 stages of successful writing, including, among other things, drafting and revising. So here's a task. Okay, imagine you've been assigned, this is going to put some meat on everything that we just went through really quickly. Okay, imagine you've been assigned a presentation for an English class. Your teacher has asked you to think of one way to improve your school and present it to the class. Plan your presentation using these questions. You will have 5 minutes to present your argument. Okay. So imagine this is the assignment we've been given. Okay. Here are 2 questions that students should ask themselves as they begin an assignment like this. Okay. First of all, what can I expect my audience to know about this topic before I start? And secondly, what will I want them to know when I have finished? What is the aim of my presentation? Okay. Regarding the first one, it's really important to know your audience. And this is something that I think to an extent we as adults have come to know and overlook the fact that we use it as often as we do. And therefore it's a lesson sometimes we forget to impart upon students. And we're sometimes surprised when they're, I have a number of academic friends having been in academia, and you'd be surprised how often they're commenting that, students are writing to them using their first name and, starting emails with, hey, what's up? And stuff like that. It's, know who you're writing to and write accordingly is a very important lesson that a lot of people don't necessarily have down pat as much as you might expect them to. But that goes beyond. I mean, there's formality in language, and that's really important to the complexity of your sentences and so forth. But it also goes to content. Just as a really simple example, I wrote a couple 100-page dissertation on some abstruse stuff in something called epistemology, and I would not. I've given that book to my family, and most of them you can't really get a whole lot out of it because it wasn't written for them. It was written for my fellow academics. If I'm giving my elevator pitch, I'm presenting that book or that dissertation in a very different light if I'm talking to someone who isn't a professional in that field. And that's an extreme example, but you've got something similar going on in, another good example is that college essay, right? Who are you writing for? Who are you trying to impress? In what way are you trying to impress them? How are you going to make that work, right? These are all questions that you need to ask before you start working on anything, okay? And then, of course, you want to know your end game, right? What is it that I'm trying to have them come away with? The end game of my dissertation is going to be different from the end game of my elevator pitch, okay? You want your audience to understand how, in this case, right? So coming back to this example, sorry, I have to move the window here out of my, okay, so I can read this. I can expect my audience to be familiar with the common problems at school. This would include insufficient student parking, lack of funding for supplies, and outdated technology in the computer lab. I want my audience to understand how my solution will improve insufficient student parking and why my solution is feasible. Okay. Now that the student has determined the audience's prior knowledge of the topic and of the goal of the presentation, the student is able to ask additional questions that will impact the structure of the presentation. The next question asks, how will I get them, the audience, from where they are to where I want them to be? Okay, and the answer here is I will begin by identifying the problem and explaining why the problem needs to be fixed. Then I will share my solution, how my solution can be executed, and why my solution is better than alternative solutions. So I need to understand it, and then I talk about its merits. Okay, what language, tone, and style will be right for this audience? A more casual tone with conversational language can be used because this presentation is, by definition, the assignment is I'm presenting it to my fellow students, trying to convince them that I have a solution for their problem. So I know who I'm talking to, so this can have a more conversational tone. I'm not giving the State of the Union, right? I'm not writing to my doctor. These are going to have different tones that would be appropriate, okay? If I were to later present my solution to school faculty, maybe members of the Board of Education, because I won an essay contest, then I might want to revise it, rewrite it, and have a more formal tone. Now that the structure and the tone for the presentation have been established, the student is able to begin reflecting on how much information is going to be in there and how it's going to be presented. Okay. So the next question would be, what arguments and evidence will they understand and relate to? Okay. Excuse me. It's important that the right information is presented in an impactful way. Here, the student answers saying, I will compare the number of student drivers to the number of available parking spaces. I will also discuss how the adjacent vacant lot can be paved and used for additional parking. The lot is already on school property, so the cost is minimal. Next, the student must think about what visual aids to use to help their presentation of the information. Student says, I will present photos of the student parking lot to demonstrate that it is at capacity. So they're going to have to go out and they're going to have to take pictures when it's full. They're going to show, if they can find a couple of examples, some illegal parking that is happening, presumably because there are no spaces left. Okay. I will include a diagram showing how the use of the vacant lot could potentially double the number of student parking spaces. Okay, so they're going to do a little bit of drafting on the side. Now the student is ready to think about the conclusion to the presentation. First, the student needs to think about how the audience will respond to the topic and how to have the audience react positively. In this example, the student says, I expect my student audience to agree that student parking is a problem that must be resolved. When they see there is an easy, implementable solution, they will be eager to see the problem resolved. Finally, the student must be prepared to answer questions. Often this is an area that students either forget or do not prepare for at all by proactively thinking about the questions that may be asked. Students are better equipped to end the presentation on a strong note. In this example, the student responds by saying, I will be asked how many parking spaces can be created and what the cost of the paving lot would be. I will be able to provide both with an estimated number of spaces and an estimated cost. So asking this series of questions, the student is really well prepared now to begin work on the assignment. Okay, so going through really quickly, I'm not going to go on to the college application process because we're running out of time. I'm just going to mention very, very briefly that at the Advanced Study Skills program at Huntington, we have units on executive functioning, evidence-based study skills, test preparation, papers and presentation, the application essay process, and it's all administered as a one-to-one individualized bit of instruction. Okay, that's my sales pitch there, and that's all there is. So in summary, the truth about studying, rereading is not an effective strategy. You have to have more arrows in your quiver than that. Multitasking can negatively impact the quality of completed work. It's better to study in small blocks of time with some breaks. What size those are is going to depend on the student. And that's just going to be better than just trying to cram and make them work for longer than they're really capable of. Also, taking notes on a computer has both advantages and disadvantages. Metacognition, awareness of and understanding of one's own learning is going to be key to academic success. And of course, we're always here to advise in any of these areas if you feel the need. Okay. For students to be successful, they have to have the tools needed to acquire, retrieve, analyze, and communicate information effectively. You can have a personal action plan can be helpful. Students can check their understanding by chunking their reading and actively engaging with their material. Before starting a test, they've got all sorts of things that they can use to be ready for the test during the preparation for taking the test, and then on test day when taking the test, but before actively engaging with the test, there's some things that they can do to make sure that that engagement goes well. All right, so if we have any time, I don't know if we do or not. I think we might be running a little bit long, but I think we started a little bit late, so I don't think it's too bad. If there are any questions, I would love to be able to answer them, but if not, then yeah, I'll just turn it over to Rosanna. Let me know if there's anything that came up.
I don't see anything in the chat so far. We can give like a minute to see if somebody has any last minute questions. I've been keeping an eye on it. You were very thorough, so maybe they are have been very
yeah, please, if anybody has any questions, please absolutely don't be shy. I don't know if, that last example obviously is a presentation that might be more natural for a high school student, but you can imagine something like that, even going all the way down to elementary school. So, that is not something that is, out of the realm of possibility, that level of planning. You want to kind of walk your student through something like that, but those are the types of questions you're going to want to be going through with them as well.
Yeah, I don't see any questions. I think we
Okay.
might be good.
Awesome.
I want to thank Dr. Ben Feder for joining us today. Thank you so much for your time. Thank all of
Absolutely.
you for joining us, whether it was on YouTube or through our Zoom meeting. We will be having another presentation on ADHD. If you haven't seen that one, it'll be next Thursday at 6 o'clock as well. So you're welcome to register for that one and get the Zoom link. I hope you guys all have a wonderful evening. Thank you so much again.
Yes. Thank you so much.